So, if like me, you've been watching the Traitors this year, you'll have seen it was probably one of the best, juiciest years they've had with so much going on. But one person that particularly stood out to me was Dan, and I am really privileged to say Dan is here with me today. Welcome, Dan. How are you?
Hi, Duncan. Yeah, I'm really great. Thanks a lot for having me on this podcast.
I can thank you. It's a genuine honor. I want to get straight into it because you kind of hit the traitors a bit like a wrecking ball because you were straight out there saying, "Well, I'm autistic, and that's going to be my difference in the gameplay." I've heard you say since that you feel that being autistic was an advantage in there, and I was thinking it would be the opposite, like it could be really overwhelming. And what was your reasoning behind it before going in? What was your thinking?
Yeah, I love looking at my autism as something to be celebrated. And one of the advantages of autism for me is the fact that I get really hyper focused on things that I love and that I'm interested in. So, reality TV, competition, and strategy shows have always been something that I've been really, really passionate about. Things like Survivor, The Traitors. So, when this opportunity came up, I was delighted to take part. And I got my autism diagnosis quite later on in life. I was 27 at the time. So, I think that was a big benefit to me because then it allowed me to shape how I felt about my own autism because I've heard stories of other people who've been diagnosed maybe slightly earlier who've had restrictions put on them because of what they've been told about autism from an early age. And I think I was quite fortunate to not have that experience. So, yeah, I went into the game intending to use what I deem to be really positive attributes linked to my version of autism and use that as part of my gameplay.
How does your autism play out in day-to-day life? One of the things I really like about the traders is that there's, and you've alluded to it too. You spoke about Linda, I think, saying that she had a very good social game. And obviously, social aspects of being autistic is one of those things that people can misconstrue in so many ways. Seeing that element to it, there's not just the strategy, there's a social strategy that has to take place as well. And I guess, I mean, that takes place in the workplace, that takes place with friends. And I mean, I know you said you love strategy games, and I know that your family almost refused to play with you because you're so.
Competitive. Yeah, they hate playing Monopoly. It just doesn't happen.
I'm quite convinced Monopoly is responsible for more domestic violence than any other game on earth.
Yeah, we had a situation where my sister's fiance made one mistake in the game, and I capitalized on it immediately, and he was really upset. He was like, you could have just let me make the mistake. I was like, oh no, 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 no. Everything is fair in this strategy game. If you make a mistake, I'm taking advantage of it. Sorry.
Yeah, all's fair in love and war, and quite now this is war. It's
And traces of Monopoly.
I want to reel back a bit before we go back into obviously heading into traders and what that experience was like for you. You say you were late diagnosed, 27. What prompted you to get diagnosed?
So when I was in my teens and in my early 20s, going through experiences like university, I did experience quite a lot of anxiety, and I underwent a load of treatments for this anxiety, but nothing ever really seemed to fully combat the underlying symptoms of the anxiety. And it got to a point where I heard more and more about autism, and so much of what I'd heard about other people describing about their autism really, really related to me and my life. So things related to sensory sensitivities. I've always been incredibly sensitive to noise, and I've had to shape my environment as much as possible to be able to cope with different levels of noise. Similarly, things related to smells or textures have always been quite difficult for me as well. So thinking about that and thinking about some of the social difficulties that I might have had, as well as my anxiety and a couple of other things and my love of routines, it all just sort of slotted into place in my mid-20s. And I had an appointment with somebody who listened to me speak for about 4 hours about my life and my experiences. And by the end of it, he said, "Yeah, I think you do qualify as being autistic."
It sounds to me like it probably wasn't a big shock that you'd already come to some understanding yourself and thought this is probably me. What was it like adjusting to that? And one of the things I love that just to reflect on what you said there, it allowed you some self-compassion. I get the feeling.
I mean, it was such a positive experience for me because A, it made everything slot into place. B, it made me feel like I didn't have to try so hard to combat a load of problems. So beforehand, I was like, oh, I need to be less anxious. I need to be better socially. I need to be the same as everybody else socially. And then after I got my diagnosis, I was like, no, I don't. I can be as weird as I want, and I can justify it now. So it was actually really, really liberating. It's allowed me to be a lot more me and not feel guilty about the ways that I do things differently to others.
Yeah. Yeah, and those are the things that I see often as advantages. One of the goals I have this year is to really sort of bring to celebrate neurodivergence in general in this world, because I think it's so misunderstood. And there are so many advantages, and I've said it a number of times on this channel before when we've talked with different people and things like, but so many of the advances we've made in this world today wouldn't have taken place without neurodivergent people, because there's a different perspective to look at. And we know that the reason we have two eyes is so we can see three-dimensionally. You need that slightly different perspective. And if we all just look at everything flat on, we're never going to see the world in that third dimension. And I think neurodivergence brings that third dimension.
100%. Yeah, I mean, I think I've always been used to seeing different perspectives to other people, and I've heard that's quite a common experience with other neurodiverse people too. So yeah, absolutely. It should be we should be able to integrate into wider groups and be able to share our unique perspectives on things.
How did it affect work? You've obviously been very open that, oh, I'm autistic, and short of getting a t-shirt and a tattoo, you're right out there with it. I imagine it was the same in the workplace. How was it received?
It was really interesting actually because I think for the first couple of years after my diagnosis, I did tiptoe around the conversation a little bit. And this was in maybe 2017. So sometimes the understanding from other people was a little bit rudimentary. And I did come up against some stereotypical ideas, I guess, at
Yeah.
times about what people thought about autism. But that's evolved massively over the last 5 years or so, and people's understanding of neurodiversity has really, really increased as well, which has been super helpful. And I think about 2 or 3 years ago, I got to the point where I was like, you know what? I'd like to talk about this a little bit more because I'd like to help others, but also because from a selfish perspective, I'd quite like other people to understand exactly how I work. So certain things really, really bother me in work. Like when people call me out of the blue, I hate it because
Yeah.
I think, I've planned my day how I want it to go. I'm quite routine based. It's just like a big spanner in the works, and I don't enjoy that at all. So speaking about it on a grander, on a bigger scale, this is what's helpful for me as a neurodiverse person has had those maybe intended consequences of people working a little bit easier with me.
I love to hear that, because I think you're right. I think the understanding of neurodivergence and mental health attached to that, I think probably has really evolved in the last 5 years or so. It's one thing I found is that if there's a difficulty with either my daughter or someone in my family who's having a struggle at that point, being able to say to someone like, oh, so you understand, she's autistic and she's struggling with this at the moment. Interestingly, with other kids as well,
Mhm.
where just being able to say to them, Sienna's autistic, she just doesn't process it the same way. So give her a few moments and she'll be right. But she doesn't mean to be offensive to you. It's not, it's just the way that her brain processes this and how she expresses it. Is that something I think, looking at your pre-Traitors interview, is one of the things you said is that you often struggle socially with people understanding your context and your approach. You can be so direct, but for you, you're just being matter of fact. How do you manage that now with this added understanding of your own or being autistic? Yeah.
I think it was difficult in the past because I would just say things that I thought were reasonable and they'd be met with quite a strong reaction. So after that, you do second guess yourself quite a bit and think, oh my God, am I offending everybody all the time? And then, yeah, the process of accepting the way that I communicate differently really kicked off when I got my diagnosis. So I think my friends and family all think it's funny now how direct I am. They don't really care. They're just like, oh, that's fine. Like I'll be at a family party or social gathering with friends, and if it gets to like 8 o'clock, I'll be like, right, I'm going now, bye. And I won't bother with any of the niceties at all because I just don't think it's worth it. And they all quite enjoy that. So yeah, I think with depending on the person, they can think that maybe I'm being a little bit blunt or direct. But everybody in my circle knows that's just who I am, and they actually quite enjoy it.
That's very cool. And I think it's something that, again, with that added understanding that people have now, I think even if you're in a situation, sometimes you can go back after and say, look, if I sounded blunt, I'm really sorry. This is how I communicate, and it's nothing personal, but I just simply state the facts as I see them in a very matter of fact way.
Yeah,
That came out in the Traitors. Watching
it
you
did.
at the round table was just one of those televisual gifts that just kept giving, because I believe your intention initially was to be very reserved for the first few round tables and ease into it, but you kind of came out guns blazing. How
Yeah.
was Yeah, what was it like? What is it like at those round tables? Because it seems like hell.
Yeah, it was really interesting because I thought I would blend in initially, but what one thing that wasn't seen in the first episode is that, well, the round tables go on for hours. So like at some point everybody's name will, gets brought up for one reason or another. And I was quite paranoid that first day, and I had heard my name from a few people, and I'd convinced myself, like the paranoia got to me, I'd convinced myself I was going home at first round table. So I just thought I'm just going to lay everything out on the line. I'm just going to, fight my corner and not really care what other people say. And it turned out that I didn't get a single vote at that round table. It actually set quite a nice precedent because I'd gotten over the nervousness of speaking up at the round table initially,
Yeah.
and I didn't really feel like worried about sort of stating, fighting my corner from that point on. So I actually think it's a bit of a blessing in disguise if you get a little bit of heat early on in the game because it prepares you for the onslaught, at the round table.
Yeah, you see it, don't you? Because I mean, Linda was interesting because when she got brought up, she had been sort of flying under the radar, and then suddenly like targets were on her, and it was you
Yeah.
could see the shock in her face and the response, and wow, okay, almost a panicked sort of. So I guess yeah, the first round table where no one really knows anyone, and you just get it out there. I imagine it is actually quite okay. Lads, I can handle that next time now, and I've had the
Yeah.
and yeah, I can imagine.
One of the really underrated elements of the game is like just being prepared at all times because at that very first round table, I had heard rumblings that my name was going to get brought up. So I was able to completely prepare my defense in advance, and that really helped me. When it came to my last round table, I hadn't heard my name at all that day. So I was a bit in panic mode myself. I was like, oh my God, where the bloody hell has this come from?
Yeah,
So I think just, yeah, having those social connections that can fill you in on everything that's happening in the game is really, really beneficial.
it's an interesting thing. You played a very interesting social game from that perspective. And it's one of those things that, again, I think so misunderstood is this idea that everyone's immediate, well, we're getting better at it, but a lot of people, their first instinct when you hear that someone's autistic is to think of Dustin Hoffman and
Yeah.
counting cards and buying underwear from Kmart, that kind of thing, that this social remove and,
Mhm.
and distance from reality almost in a way. But that's so clearly not the case. You played an interesting social game because I mean you did make some very strong. I'm going to call them alliances, but it seems at times like friendships. Like you really gained people's trust quite early.
Yeah, I did. And I think I told several people quite early on about my autism because I thought going into the game, I'm going to be playing the game differently to other people. I'm going to see it very much as a compartmentalized game. And I don't want that to come across suspiciously or coldly to people because it's not something that British people often do in these games. So that, along with a few other reasons, made me want to contextualize my game right from the off. And I think by being open and vulnerable with a few people straight away did win their trust because it was quite, I think British games compared to other games. There's definitely still a lot of strategy involved, but there's also a lot more emotion than maybe the American version, for example.
Yeah, the
So
Americans
I
are
think
really cold with it, aren't they? It's just fully.
really cutthroat.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think yeah, appealing to people by just being open was something I did quite early on, and it was able to build those alliances quite quickly.
Couldn't you have just faked a Welsh accent?
I'm terrible at accents. I can't even write properly. So I would have been rumbled within the first 10 minutes.
What was your thoughts when you first heard that? Because that was something I thought going in. Why would you do that to yourself?
I think somebody told me in my own cloaked, and I just thought, oh, that was a random joke that didn't really land. So I just completely ignored it. And then I didn't find out until months after the show. I was like, what? What? Like, I had no response to it because I was just so like, it was so bizarre.
So you find out you're going on the Traitors,
Yeah.
and you know that you are going to face obstacles that others don't, and probably find things easier than others wouldn't. So, like that kind of black and white gameplay is something that obviously natural and probably really helpful, analytical, and I like almost like the Terminator. You can almost see the glasses coming down and the the information as you look around. But how did you prepare mentally for it? Because for me, I've looked at it and I thought if I ever got the chance, I couldn't do it because I have a desperate need to be liked by most people. And the second my name would get mentioned, I'd be a gibbering mess of paranoia. Why do they hate me? Yes, I mean, how do you prepare for that mentally going in?
I mean, I think I'm probably the opposite, really. I don't mind if people don't like me at all. And again, I think that comes from my diagnosis because I just think, you know what, screw you. Like, if you don't get me, that's fair enough. Yeah, I probably don't get you either. So from a strategy perspective and from a ruthlessness perspective, I wasn't worried about it in the slightest. I'd played quite a lot of online strategy games with my family and friends during lockdown, and I would play to win every time. Like I'd vote my cousin out, I'd vote my best friend out, and not feel any guilt about it.
I
Thing
get
that
that. You just went in and attacked and got them out in the first round of
honestly, it's just like, it's a business trip. This, time to go. Um, the thing that I knew was going to be hard, and which was hard, was well, it's twofold. A, it's the social small talk that you have to do around the game, because I found that you spend a lot of time with these people. Not all going to be 100% strategy. You are going to be talking about your lives as well. I admittedly found that a little bit boring to begin with. I was like, no, 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 let's go back to the game. Uh, but the other thing that I found hard was just literally being surrounded by people 20, well, not 24/7, but for most of the hours during the day, because that's really intense. I'm a complete introvert by nature. I live with my partner. We don't really mix with too many other people. It's just me and him. And I've got friends and I've got family, but we don't all see each other too often. So just but physically being around people was exhausting to me, and I just when we were in our breakout spaces, I would just lie there, sit there with my eyes closed and just, not really engage.
Yeah.
But I needed to do that in order to sort of like save my own sort of mental energy.
Gather your spoons, as they say, and
Honestly, like they were all nearly gone after like 10 minutes of a bit of small talk. So I had to really, but I knew that was going to be difficult going in. But I mean, there was a really big team, a big production team that we worked with, and they were all really nice. And I think maybe sometimes could sense if I was withdrawing a little bit, or often would say to me, "Look, you need a bit of a break." There's rooms that you can go to in order to just sort of decompress a little bit.
that's cool. So they were looking after you from that perspective as well, to some degree at least.
Nice.
That's really good to hear because you hear so many stories of, and especially with a game like the Traitors, the mental drain and pressure that must be on for the, because I mean you're there for a few weeks, is that right? All up?
Yeah, depending on how long you stay for, yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's uh, between like 1 to 3, 3.5 weeks is
Yeah.
all.
I mean, that's a lot of intense mental pressure and paranoia and stress and physical exertion and all that kind of stuff. So to know that they're actually taking care of that mental well-being is kind of encouraging, actually.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, for me, it was really weird because ultimately the thing that kind of fatigued me most by the end of the game, and you can see it in my last episode, was just the mind games that play upon you when you make an incorrect call or if you have like a bad move in the game.
Yeah.
Because that last day or two, I was just thinking, walking around thinking, I'm a stupid idiot. I'm getting everything wrong. I'm doing everything wrong that a person possibly could be doing. And I just thought, I'm going to look like the biggest moron ever. Because, it's quite an intense game. You do sort of overplay like some of these negative thoughts while you're in the moment. So that was probably the most difficult thing for me those last couple of days.
What's interesting, uh, you said initially before you went in, before you knew going to whether you were going to be a traitor or a faithful, you spoke about the fact that spotting liars would be something that was easy and stuff like that. It's one of those things that I looked at and thought, well, actually, yeah, I can imagine you would probably be better than that than many people would. But you see so many people go in there with this perception that they're going to be, and you see people who are convinced that they're right. And I can't remember her name, but in the last series, there was the girl who was convinced she was right. She was right about one of them, but the other two were so far off. But because she was right on one, it becomes this cemented, I'm right about everything now, and people's perspectives seem to shift. And you kind of had that with picking Linda, that he identified straight away that that was that look, and it really was obvious. It's so interesting to me that people go in with that, and then you're almost laughing at. It's like when you watch The Apprentice nowadays.
Mhm.
Watching you're an idiot. Why are you doing that? And it's like you can see that you can do that from your couch, and so I would play everything perfectly.
Honestly, I think another really underrated part of the game is being humbled because we all come into it with, an inflated sense of self. Otherwise, we have to sell ourselves hard to get on the show in the first place. So, we're going to have to be feeling confident to begin with. But I think being wrong quite early on in the game is really important for you as a player because then you humble yourself, you start to look at the evidence and you don't kind of like get lost in your own ego. And my problem was that I didn't have that experience until the fifth round table. I rallied a lot of people against somebody that I thought was a traitor, and then I was wrong. And
Yeah.
then the next episode was the episode that I went out. So I didn't really have a chance to come down from that wrong assessment. Like if I'd had that maybe a day or two before, and then I had a few days to recalibrate, I could have done a little bit better. But it was a series of unfortunate events by the time I left.
It happens. I mean, my favorite moment was actually still the Freddie when he went out and just how he got caught in his lies. And oh, it was, drinks in the evening. She'd gone. And you could see his face and you could see his brain trying to catch up with his mouse at that point. Is there a lot of that goes on where you sort of see it doesn't make it onto screen?
It's difficult. I mean, because I effectively did the same thing as what Freddie did. I got caught in a lie, and that was the reason that I went out.
I mean, that was intense as well because it was,
That was horrendous.
yeah,
Because I approached that game thinking, okay, I know how to win this mission, and also I see benefits in not revealing that information afterwards about the people that I've marked specifically in the gunking situation. And I thought other people would all see the same perspective as me. But I think that was one of my biggest problems in the game as well, is just thinking that people would always interpret the same situation the way that I did. And obviously, everyone's got their own life experiences that they're bringing into the game. So yeah, I mean that was difficult to adjust to, I think.
on the gunking, something that I
Yeah,
noticed interesting. Being in that situation, I mean, you avoided getting gunked, but
yeah.
you said that there are sensory issues. Is that something that's taken into consideration in a situation like that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know how I would have responded to being gunked because I didn't experience that, but I potentially I would have found it difficult. So yeah, I was quite lucky to sort of weave my way through that challenge and not having stuff dunked on me.
Even if it resulted in you being banished within.
Exactly.
So this side of things and having had chance to reflect, what do you think an experience like the Traitors has brought to everyday life? Because I would imagine you start to see the world a bit differently and people's motives differently. When you're in that sort of pressure cooker situation and the intensity, and you
Mhm.
see because you're there to look for people's tells almost. Is that something that carries through to life afterwards?
I think that I mean it is a massively humbling experience because you realize that you can't always trust your judgment and everybody has biases and gets things wrong all the time. So it's very, very humbling from that perspective. I think some of the other major things that I took away from it, and the whole thing was an incredible learning experience, was that I could definitely work on my overthinking because that was something that really did me in the last few days. I just started to feel I'm stupid, I'm getting everything wrong and did hamper me at times. So being able to work on that a little bit more. And then also if there's opportunities for me to be a little bit more flexible and
Yeah.
adaptable to situations, because there were times when I definitely didn't read the room, when people were telling each other about being gunked, and I was like, well, I'm not telling anybody, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But even though I may not completely understand where people are coming from, I have to recognize it's still a social game. And by making myself an outsider one too many times, it was understandable the way things went down the way it did.
Yeah, yeah, you could see why it happened, but I think also it's interesting in those scenarios because I think what you see is you see it straight away. They're looking for any reason to see that you're a traitor. They're looking to latch onto anything. Traitors as well, like that whole table, they're out in the end for number one, and that's something that you actually said. This is well, it's of course I'm here to win. That's the whole point of this game. Anyone who says it's not, then they're lying. It's so interesting to see people latch on to anything when you're in that situation, and I think that's something that we gloss over in life. Interesting. I've been watching The Recruit on Netflix at the moment, and it's this
Okay.
lawyer in the CIA, but he's new, and it's as much about him getting around to office politics and the people that it's really interesting to watch because it is about how do I survive this social aspect of this thing and the one-upmanship and people trying that kind of dog eat dog business
Mhm.
environment whilst also trying to get a job done that's particularly stressful and high risk.
Yep.
When you're in that sudden situation, and when you start looking at the world and office politics and stuff like that, and people who are just they're looking for the next rung up the ladder, and what people will grasp onto, I think that would I'd find it fascinating and also almost overwhelming, because I think I'd start not trusting anyone.
Yeah. And it's again, like I was able to see things as being a part of the game. So I think I was quite good at not taking things too personally. If I could understand the strategic reason behind somebody making a particular move, I'd be like, you know what, respect, that's fair enough. When Mina went against me in my final roundtable, I was like, you know what, it makes sense from a game perspective. Good for you.
Yeah,
Happy that you did that. So I think that was a good thing that I had about my game. But yeah, always vocalizing exactly why I was here, rubbed people up the wrong way at times. I just didn't have a filter in those moments because again, I just saw it as a very factual, logical argument. Yes, I'm doing this in my own self-interests because it makes sense because I want to stay in the game.
I
I
think
think
people
it's
don't like to realize that they are that way when you confront somebody with the truth like that.
yeah, it's not expected and it's
Therefore,
not very
it's almost like holding a mirror up. You're here for yourself. Don't lie.
yeah.
But you don't want to think that, no, I'm here. I'm better than that. And, whatever. I'm not saying illusions or delusions, but that, whatever you're telling yourself, ultimately, that fact remains that you're there to win. That's what you want
Yeah.
to do. And I think it's a fascinating parallel to life that probably gets missed quite a bit.
I think it's also the interesting thing here is the UK cultural context with this kind of thing as well, because I think in America, in American strategy shows, people are quite honest about their intentions. Everybody is there to win, and it's a lot more competitive. Whereas I think historically in British reality shows, competitiveness and ruthlessness at times is frowned upon. At least being so open about it. So I think
Yes.
sometimes the things that I was saying weren't too palatable, I guess, maybe for a UK audience all the time. But I mean, I was just being honest.
You're reminding me of Douglas Adams. I saw Douglas Adams speak at an event when I lived in Australia. It was fantastic. And he talked about a story that he had that was actually something that genuinely happened to him. He was talking about the fact that life rarely provides you a punchline. He wrote it into one of his Hitchhiker's Guide books. It became urban legend, and Jeffrey Archer had included it in a book, and he was sort of trying to claim it back by including it. But it was a true story. And I think it was Paddington Station, but I can't be sure. It was a station, railway station 9, and he, in between trains, and he ducked in for a coffee, and he got his coffee, got a packet of biscuits, the three biscuits in the cellophane, and he bought a newspaper, and he sat, and it was packed, and there was one table with one chap sitting there, and he's like, "Oh, do you mind if I?" I said, "Hey, yeah, absolutely fine." And he sat down and he put his paper down and stirred his coffee, had a drink, and he's sort of getting ready for his paper, and this chap's just picked up his packet of biscuits, torn it open and taken a biscuit out. And he's like, what is this person doing? And the phrase he uses is like a red hot blooded British man. I silently sat there, picked up the packet of biscuits and took another one out myself and just bit it with purpose, kind of thing, with him, this other guy looking at him. And the other guy reached forward and took the last biscuit out and ate it, picked up his paper, walked out. And Douglas Adams was there like, what just happened? Like, really, what's this world come to? Picks up his newspaper to go and sees his packet of biscuits under his paper and realizes he'd been doing it to the other guy.
Yeah,
He had the punchline, but the other guy didn't. This guy's still out there thinking, this horrible stranger stole his biscuits. It was just one of those things that it strikes me about you. You're right. It's such a British thing to be
yeah,
seen to be confrontational is very un-British.
100%. Yeah, the polite, passive aggressive nature is quite pervasive at times. And it's really interesting watching some of my arguments back on the show because in the moment, I felt they were so much more intense than what was actually shown. I thought I was screaming at people. And I think I was still demonstrating quite a lot of restraint in those arguments, which is interesting.
I think your intensity increased without your volume. You would
Yeah,
become very firm in your
very
delivery.
stern,
Yeah.
like a headmaster.
Yeah. It was genuine TV gold to watch. Dan, it has been fantastic talking to you. I want to sum up with a question that I'd like, you talked about how this, what it was like in there, the social aspects. You talked about work and your work environment and how was that there. I want to reach the people now who are maybe not neurodivergent themselves, but they're working with neurodivergent people. They're have neurodivergent people in their lives. They might be bosses, they might just be colleagues, they might be friends. What would you say the best thing anyone can do to start breaking down these barriers and stigmas that exist would be to move forward?
I've been surrounded by some excellent neurotypical people in my life, people who've really uplifted me and they've understood me. And I think that's part of the reason why I have a lot of confidence in myself now. I think the biggest thing that neurotypical people can do is to really listen to the neurodiverse people around them when they're asking for accommodations or they're trying to let them know about their experience. Because as much as I've had great people in my life who have listened to me and who believed me, there've also been other people who've just tried to dismiss me and say, no, no, that's not a problem. You know, you shouldn't be worried about this noise. And that can be quite challenging. And I know that's an experience that a lot of neurodiverse people have as well. So just listen to the people, do what you can to help them. Know that there are challenges they're going to be experiencing that you won't always fully understand, but just believe them, give them the benefit of the doubt. Nobody's raising these challenges to just be difficult. And yeah, just try and make things easy and just be human.
That's fantastic advice. Dan, I can't thank you enough for having joined me on this. It's been so enlightening, and it's genuinely a joy when you see people who are, what a lot of the world would classify as, a disabled person in one way or another, who are just getting on with life, and actually I'm winning at it. So it's brilliant. Thank you so much, man. I really have enjoyed it.
Very much likewise. It's been great speaking.
If you've enjoyed this, please do consider hitting subscribe and maybe hitting the like. You don't have to, but it does really help just to get things moved along. That's my standard YouTube thing out there. And there will be more episodes coming. I've been quiet recently. We've had a lot of dramas at home and I've taken a bit of a break, but I'm back and I'm so glad to be back in such a positive way with Dan this week. I will see you on the next episode. In the meantime, please do stay safe.